Hi guys! So I get a lot of questions from my subscribers asking me some problems about language learning, but sometimes I think that some of these problems that are being asked are not actually problems. Instead, they're just kind of normal hurdles that is actually a part of the process. So in this video, I want to share with you 4 common hurdles that you actually shouldn't really be worried about, because that's just a natural part of the process to reaching fluency in a foreign language. Number 1, having an accent. So Trevor Noah, which is one of my favorite stand-up comedians, once explained what an accent is very beautifully.
When speaking to somebody in an accent, the number one rule to understand is an accent is not a measurement of intelligence, right? An accent is just somebody speaking your language with the rules of theirs. That's all an accent is.
So an accent is just somebody speaking your language with the rules of theirs. That is so beautifully put, and that's one of my favorite quotes. So there are about 1.35 billion English speakers in the world, but only 380 million of them are native speakers. So the majority of English speakers, they speak it as their second, third, or fourth language, which means most likely that if they speak it as second, third, or fourth language, they would have an accent when they speak English. So come to think about it, having an accent is just normal if you just see the numbers. And also, even native speakers, British, American, Canadian, New Zealand, they have an accent. They have an American accent, they have an Australian accent. So everybody has an accent, it's a normal thing. Of course, it's not always that simple, because when I used to live in the US, everybody had an American accent. So me coming to the US, I had a slight accent, of course, and I stood out because my accent was different than the rest. But the thing is, that was actually pretty cool as a conversation starter. It's like, oh, you have an accent. You're not from here. Where are you from? Oh, Indonesia. Where is that? Of course, it's not always that simple. If you live in a country where English is the first language, having an accent might kind of discourage you because it makes you feel different. Whereas here now, I live in the Netherlands, where I have a lot of international friends from all over the world whose first language isn't English. So only when I moved to the Netherlands and surrounded myself with a lot of international people, I really realized that having an accent is just a natural, normal thing, and it's not something that should be ashamed of. However, having an accent does become a problem if your accent is so thick that it prevents the other person, your conversation partner, to actually understand what you're saying. So that becomes a problem because it prevents you from communicating. So in that way, maybe you would have to train your pronunciation or your speaking skills, or subscribe to an accent reduction program or anything like that. Number 2, having difficulties when pronouncing certain words or sounds. So every language has its own unique sounds. Most likely, if your native language do not have these unique sounds, you're gonna have difficulties pronouncing these words. This is because your tongue and all of the muscles in your mouth are not used to making these kind of movements to producing these sounds. So it's like the G in Dutch, like graag gedaan or 88, or the R in French, like crème de la crème. I don't even know if I pronounced it right, so please bear with me. Or the TH in English. A lot of people have difficulties pronouncing this. So this, that, though. Oh, that thing, though. That thing, though. Even I have difficulties pronouncing these. Or the AO in Portuguese, like pão de queijo. So when you're learning a foreign language and you mispronounce some words, it's actually, it could come across kind of cute and endearing. However, it does become a problem when the mispronunciation of these words lead to you saying a completely different thing, often with inappropriate meanings. For instance, a lot of Indonesians cannot tell the difference between these sounds, the shit and the sheet, because both words only uses one vowel, which is the I, sheet, shit, or beach, bitch. But if you mispronounce these words, I think the mistake could be quite fatal. Or pau and pão in Portuguese. Pão means bread, pau means stick, which is kind of a politer word, or just another way to say a man's genitalia. Or años and años in Spanish. Tengo 23 años means I'm 23 years old. Tengo 23 años means I have 23 anuses. So when you find yourself mispronouncing these words and it does lead to a more inappropriate meaning, then that's when you would have to improve your pronunciation, especially on these words.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We're thinking.
What are you thinking about?
Number 3, forgetting a word over and over again. Truth is, if you really want to remember a piece of information, you would have to put this in your long-term memory. So this is the forgetting curve. It shows that information that enters your brain will get lost over time at an exponential rate if you don't do anything to retain it. So if it weren't for this curve, anything that enters our brain for the first time would stick there forever. But life just won't let us get away with that so easily. So remembering and then forgetting again, remembering, forgetting is actually a part of the process for you to get a piece of information in your long-term memory. And that is when the spaced repetition system comes into place. So I've talked about the SRS a few times in this channel before, but for those of you who are new or who have never heard of a spaced repetition system, it's basically a learning technique where you repeatedly review a piece of information over a period of time at a gradually increasing interval. So it goes like this. When you learn something in day 1, the curve looks like this. And then when you review that same thing again in day 3, you're going to interrupt the forgetting curve. And every time the forgetting curve is interrupted, it will take longer for you to forget that piece of information. And the more you repeat it, eventually the curve just flattens out, which means you have successfully transferred that piece of information into your long-term memory. So it's kind of like a way to hack your brain so that it stores more information. But what if I keep forgetting a word no matter how hard I try? From my experience, when that happens, it's kind of like my brain's way of telling me that's unimportant information that you don't really need to know. It's kind of like my brain's way of filtering out unnecessary information to stay in there. Probably if there's a piece of information or a new word that I come across and I want to remember it, and for some reason I just can't successfully remember it, it's probably irrelevant to my life, or it's a word that I would never use in my day-to-day, or it's just a piece of information that's not going to improve my life anyway. So it's just kind of like a way that my brain would filter out all these unnecessary information. So if I try to remember a certain word or information and I just can't remember it, I just stop trying. Number 4, not understanding every word when native speakers talk. So ever since I make my videos fully in English, I get a lot of comments like this. Oh, I can understand you, but when I watch native speakers, I just don't get anything. That is completely normal because normally native speakers, doesn't matter in any language, they tend to jumble up and, combine the words together that it sounds like a completely different word. For instance, the phrase all of it, native speakers say all of it, all of it. It doesn't even sound like all of it. It sounds completely different than how you'd imagine it to be. So it's completely normal not to understand every word that native speakers say. It actually takes some getting used to for your ears to get used to the sounds, like to the speed at which native speakers speak. For instance, so yesterday I was in a call with the municipality in my city because I got this surprise letter that I had to pay a late fine because I didn't pay the water bill and the garbage bill on time. But I did pay before the due date. So I called just to make sure what's going on, and I don't want to pay this amount for the fine. So I just called to make sure, and I did everything in Dutch. And to be honest, when I was speaking with the lady on the phone, I probably only understood about 75% of it. But in the end, I did understand that this bill was a mistake and they just received my payment late, and I could just ignore it. So that is the important thing. Even though I didn't understand everything, every word she said, I understood that I don't need to worry about this. And that is good enough for me. As long as I understand the message, I'm okay. And then slowly with time and with more exposure to native level content, hopefully I'll be able to understand 100% whenever native speakers speak in full speed. However, it does become a problem when you don't understand anything what is being said, because then you can't really communicate. So yeah, in short, it becomes a problem if you cannot communicate. But of course, understanding native speakers 100% takes time and takes effort and takes some getting used to, and that is just a part of the process. So that is it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you next week in another video. And until then, you have a good day and bye-bye.